In 1984, a young girl and her father set off from Austin, Texas, for what was supposed to be a simple weekend road trip. They never returned. Left behind was a mother, grieving, devastated, and haunted by questions that would go unanswered for over 16 long years. But then, one ordinary afternoon, a junkyard owner would stumble upon something so chilling among rusted, forgotten vehicles that it would shake everything to its core. The late autumn sunlight poured gently through the living room windows of Margaret Halbrook's modest Austin home. It painted golden lines across the old hardwood floor and flickered over the floral pattern of the worn sofa where she sat quietly, the television remote clenched tightly in her hand. Beside her, her elderly mother Doris perched on the edge of the cushion, her face weathered with the same anticipation and quiet dread that had accompanied this day every year since 1984. "It's almost time," Margaret whispered, barely loud enough to be heard, her thumb pressing the volume button as the local news program came to life on the television screen. For 16 years, Margaret had paid local stations to air a missing persons alert. On the exact day her family vanished, it had become a ritual of pain and persistence. As the commercials faded, her breath caught in her chest. The screen displayed a familiar photograph, a smiling man with a thick mustache and warm eyes standing next to a cheerful little girl. A bright red 1979 Cadillac DeVille gleamed behind them. 16 years ago today, Jim Halbrook and his 8-year-old daughter Lucia vanished during a weekend road trip, the announcer stated. They were last seen driving a red 1979 Cadillac. DeVille, Texas license plate THB 1043. If you have any information about their disappearance, please contact the Austin Police Department. Margaret quickly turned off the TV. The sudden silence seemed louder than the broadcast had been. She turned to her mother and noticed how that same grim expression had once again settled on her face. "I'll go upstairs to freshen up," Doris said softly, giving Margaret's hand a gentle squeeze before slowly rising from the couch. Margaret nodded, watching her mother's slow ascent up the staircase. Left alone, she walked toward the bookcase that lined the far side of the room. Her fingertips grazed over the familiar row of book spines until they stopped on a well-worn, leather-bound photo album. She pulled it down with care, as if it were something sacred, and returned to the couch. Opening it gently, she turned the pages, each one holding frozen memories of a life that felt like a distant dream. Jim, standing proudly beside the Cadillac he'd worked so hard to buy, Lucia, beaming on her first day of school, the three of them laughing together at Barton Springs. A soft smile formed on Margaret's lips, quickly overtaken by a trembling sadness. Her finger traced the photo of her daughter's face. "Where are you?" she whispered, her voice cracking, the same question she had asked the pictures over and over for years. Then, the sharp ring of the telephone shattered the silence. Margaret jumped slightly, closed the album, and set it aside before hurrying into the kitchen to answer. "Hello," she said, breathless. "Mrs. Halbrook, this is Officer Daniels from the Austin Police Department," the voice responded. "We've just received a report of possible evidence discovered at a junkyard in San Marcos. We believe it could be linked to your husband and daughter's case." Margaret's free hand gripped the kitchen counter tightly, her knees weak. "What kind of evidence?" she asked, trying to steady her voice. "I'm afraid we can't share details over the phone, ma'am. But we'd like you to come and identify what's been found. We can have a patrol car at your location within 10 minutes. "Yes," Margaret replied immediately, her pulse pounding. "Yes, I'll be ready." She hung up and quickly turned toward the staircase. "Mom," she called, her voice urgent. "The police just called. They found something at a junkyard in San Marcos. They think it might be connected to Jim and Lucia." Doris appeared at the top of the stairs, her face pale, fear creeping into her features. "What did they find?" she asked. "They didn't say," Margaret replied. But they're sending a car to pick us up in 10 minutes. Without hesitation, Doris began descending the stairs, her earlier fatigue forgotten. "I'm coming with you," she said firmly. They sat in a tense, heavy silence, waiting for the arrival of the patrol car. When it finally pulled up, the officer, behind the wheel, introduced himself simply as Officer Martinez. He said little else during the nearly hour-long drive south to San Marcos. Margaret stared out the window, the Texas countryside slipping past like a blur. But her mind raced with endless unsettling thoughts. Beside her, Doris held her purse tightly on her lap, her fingers clenched so hard the knuckles turned white. When they finally pulled into Harrow's auto salvage, Margaret's stomach turned. Several police vehicles were already on the scene, and yellow crime scene tape roped off a section of the junkyard. Officer Martinez led them wordlessly through a maze of rusting, crumpled vehicles until they reached a small group of officials clustered around something hidden from Margaret's view. "Detective Reyes," Officer Martinez called out. "Mrs. Halbrook and her mother are here." A tall man dressed in plain clothes turned to greet them. His expression was composed, but Margaret could sense the weight behind his carefully guarded demeanor. "Mrs. Halbrook, Mrs. Barrett, thank you both for coming on such short notice," he said respectfully. Margaret's voice wavered slightly, though she managed to keep it steady. "What did you find?" Detective Reyes didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped aside, revealing what the group had been standing around. Margaret's legs threatened to buckle beneath her. There, partially crushed but still painfully recognizable, was a red Cadillac DeVille. Its once bright paint had dulled with time and was streaked with rust. But Margaret knew immediately. This was Jim's car, the one he had saved for years to purchase, the one he had cherished, cared for, and maintained with pride. The same car he and their daughter Lucia had driven off in 16 years ago. "Oh my God," Doris whispered, clutching Margaret's arm tightly for support. Margaret moved toward the vehicle slowly, like someone caught in a dream or a nightmare. The Cadillac appeared to have been crushed, likely by the large excavator parked nearby. Police officers moved methodically around it, photographing every angle, taking precise measurements, and combing the surrounding area. "We haven't been able to examine the interior due to the extent of the damage," Detective Reyes explained gently. "But we need your confirmation. Mrs. Halbrook, is this your husband's vehicle?" Margaret walked around the mangled car, her eyes inspecting every visible detail. She stopped at the rear passenger side, where a small dent marred the chrome. "Of the wheel cover, Jim hit a curb the week before they disappeared," she said quietly, almost to herself. "We planned to get it repaired, but—" Her voice trailed off, caught in the emotion of the moment. She turned to look at Detective Reyes, her eyes brimming with tears. She refused to let fall. "Yes," she said firmly, "this is their car." Detective Reyes gave a solemn nod. He then motioned toward a man standing nervously just beyond the police line. "This is Dean Lam, the owner of the junkyard. He's the one who contacted us." Dean stepped forward, wiping his grease-stained hands on a rag before hesitantly offering one to Margaret. "I'm truly sorry, Ma'am," he said with genuine remorse. "I had no idea about the car's past. It was scheduled for crushing this morning. I was back in my office afterward when I saw the missing persons alert. On TV, I recognized the car immediately and called the police." Margaret didn't acknowledge his extended hand. Her focus was on the questions racing through her mind. "How did it end up here?" she asked sharply. "Who brought it in?" Dean looked uneasy and shifted from one foot to the other. "That's the strange part, Ma'am," he said slowly. "We have no record of that car ever being brought in. It's not in our system at all." "That sounds highly suspicious," Doris said, her tone cutting. Detective Reyes raised his hand gently to intervene. "Mrs. Barrett, Mr. Lam is the one who reported the vehicle to us. At this point, we have no reason to believe he had anything to do with how it got here." I've been trying to make sense of how it ended up here myself, Dean said insistently. We have very strict protocols when it comes to accepting vehicles, complete paperwork, identification, the full process. As he spoke, a woman wearing grease-stained overalls approached the group. I saw Reed bring it in, she stated. Instantly, everyone turned their attention toward her. Reed? Detective Reyes questioned. Reed Carraway, Dean explained. He's my business partner, handles the technical operations. He's our head technician here. Detective Reyes pulled out his phone without hesitation. We need to talk to him right away. Can you get him on the phone? Dean nodded and pulled out his own phone, quickly dialing a number. After several tense moments, he shook his head. No answer. I'll need his home address, Reyes said firmly. Of course, Dean replied. He reached into his pocket, retrieved a small notebook, and scribbled down the details. He lives in South Austin. This is his address. Reyes took the slip of paper and handed it to one of the nearby officers. I want a unit sent to this location immediately. He ordered, have them bring Mr. Carraway in for questioning. Turning back to Dean, he asked, is there anything of Mr. Carraway's here on site that might be relevant to the investigation? His office, Dean replied, but it's locked. Only Reed has the key. We'll need a warrant to search. Properly, Reyes said, turning to another officer. Start that process. Margaret remained quiet during the exchange, her eyes fixed on the wrecked red Cadillac. 16 years of endless questions, of clinging to hope. And now, this. The very car that had carried her husband and daughter away all those years ago was now sitting in front of her, crushed almost beyond recognition, yet still no sign of Jim or Lucia. Let's begin a search of the surrounding area, Reyes instructed his team. Then, he turned to Margaret and Doris. If you're up for it, your help in identifying any possible personal items would be incredibly valuable. Margaret nodded silently, and both she and her mother followed the officers as they started a careful sweep of the junkyard. Hours passed as they combed through piles of metal scraps, old machinery, and discarded debris. Still, no evidence surfaced. No trace of Jim, no sign of Lucia. Eventually, the search brought them to Reed Carraway's locked office. They stood outside, waiting either for the man himself to arrive or for the warrant that would grant them access. Margaret leaned wearily against the wall, the emotional weight of the day etched into every line of her face. Doris stood beside her, one arm gently draped around her daughter's shoulders. Neither spoke, both lost in their thoughts as the midday sun climbed toward its peak. At last, 2 police cruisers pulled into the junkyard. Margaret and Doris straightened with anticipation. A third vehicle, a dark blue pickup truck, followed close behind. It came to a stop a short distance away, and a man in his mid-20s stepped out. He had short brown hair and wore a work shirt with the junkyard's logo stitched on the pocket. Detective Reyes approached him swiftly. Mr. Carraway. The man nodded, his expression puzzled. Yes, that's me. What's going on? The officer said it was urgent. I'm Detective Reyes, he said, extending a hand. We're investigating the discovery of a red Cadillac found on your lot, one that's tied to a missing persons case from 16 years ago. Reed's eyes widened slightly. The car that was crushed earlier today? I heard Dean called. You about it? Reyes nodded, then gestured toward Margaret and Doris. This is Margaret Halbrook and her mother, Doris Barrett. The car belonged to Mrs. Halbrook's husband, who disappeared along with their daughter 16 years ago. Reed's face turned somber as he approached the 2 women. I'm deeply sorry to hear that, he said gently. He offered his hand, and after a moment of hesitation, Margaret took it. The vehicle wasn't properly logged in your system, Detective Reyes pointed out. One of your employees mentioned she saw you bring it in. Can you explain how the car came into your possession? Reed ran a hand through his hair, exhaling heavily. Yeah, that was kind of an odd situation. About a week ago, an older guy brought it in. Dean wasn't around at the time. The guy said he didn't need the car anymore and just wanted it destroyed. Did he give you his name? Reyes asked sharply. Reed shook his head. No. And that's what was weird. He paid in cash, a decent amount too. But when I tried to get his information for our records, he just took off, left the keys in the ignition and walked away. I called after him, even ran a few steps to follow him, but he was gone. Can you describe this man? Reyes pressed. Reed thought for a moment, furrowing his brow in concentration. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, pretty thin, had grey hair, though it looked like it used to be dark, wore glasses and had a thick mustache. He was dressed in khaki, pants and a button-up shirt, spoke real soft, almost too quiet to understand him. Margaret inhaled sharply, a sound of disbelief escaping her. That sounds like Jim, she whispered to Doris, her face drained of color.